So we're going to get back to maths for data science. And the topic that we're going to talk about today is probability. So we're going to talk about probability and the applications for probability in any and all ideas that are relevant to data science. Now, to begin with the idea of probability, we must understand what probability is. So probability very simply is what the literal meaning makes it out to be, which is it is the likelihood of occurrence of a certain event. So probability is basically something that measures the likelihood of occurrence, which means that let's say there's a cricket match that's going to happen. We talk about what are the chances for India winning, what are the chances for India losing. When we talk about something called chance is something that is associated to likelihood of something happening. And that is what we quantify in mathematics as the term probability. We say that the likelihood of a certain event happening in a certain way is termed as probability. And this is going to become an important idea when we talk about a lot of data science concepts and a lot of data science principles. Now, in order to understand probability better, we'll first define a few terms that are relevant to this idea. We start off with the idea of a statistical experiment. Now, anything that we do inside probability, now there are two kinds of processes. Processes can either be deterministic or they can be probabilistic or stochastic, which means that deterministic processes are those wherein once you know what the input variable is, once you know what the input is, you know for sure what the output is going to be. So let's say if you think about the cost of taking a Zoom car, so at this stage, you know that the cost that will get calculated will depend on the amount of distance that you're going to travel with it, the number of days that you're going to take for a subscription. But as long as those values are fixed, you know for a fact what the cost of taking a Zoom car is going to be. As compared to that, there could be some process wherein, let's say, whether you're going to get selected in a competitive entrance exam or not, no matter, let's say there are two people, A and B. Now, A puts in 8 hours of effort per day, and B as well, he also puts in 8 hours of effort per day. They both sit for an exam. You see that one of them succeeds, the other one fails. Now, this is a kind of process. If you're thinking about success in a competitive exam, that is a process that could be treated as a probabilistic process. Even after knowing the inputs, there is some degree of uncertainty about what the output could be. And therefore, those kinds of processes would be what would fall under the purview of probability. And any and all such experiments would be called a statistical experiment. So a simple statistical experiment could be tossing a coin or rolling a dice. So these could be treated as probabilistic experiments or statistical experiments. Now, that's the first term that we read about. A statistical experiment can be defined as anything that has more than one outcomes possible, which means that as a result of carrying out what you carry out in that experiment, so let's say you toss a coin. If I toss a coin, there are two possibilities. You either get a heads on top or you get a tails on top. Now, these two possibilities are termed as outcomes. Now, tossing a coin is a probabilistic event because when you toss it, there are two things that can happen. One of either of those two outcomes will actually happen. Therefore, there are more than one outcomes for this statistical experiment. Therefore, tossing a coin is an experiment, and the outcomes for this experiment is called heads and tails. A set that defines these outcomes together. So these are the only possible outcomes for tossing a coin. A set like this is called a sample space. And every point in the sample space is called a sample point. So this is some basic jargon that we've got to get acquainted with to talk about certain ideas in probability. We started off with the idea of a statistical experiment. Any process that we carry out where there is a possibility of more than one outcomes as a result of that experiment is called a statistical experiment. Examples for that we just realized are tossing a coin, rolling a dice. Now, if I roll a dice, what are the possible outcomes for rolling a dice? There's 6 possible outcomes to it. You could either get 1 on top, 2, 3, 4, 5, or 6. So if I were asked to write the sample space for this experiment, the sample space will be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. Now this would be the sample space for this experiment, because rolling a dice could give me one of these outcomes as a possibility. Another thing about these outcomes is that every outcome comes with a probability of occurrence. So for every outcome, when you create a statistical experiment, you see that there are different possible outcomes, and each outcome would have some probability of occurrence. Now in this case, as long as the dice is fair, as long as we can say for sure that we are rolling a fair dice, we would be able to say that the probability of and let's say we are storing the face that you get on top inside a variable called x. Now if you use a variable called x to store what comes on top, it could either be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 or 6. This x is called a random variable. So random variables in probability are variables that store the outcome of an experiment. Now the random variable can take any value inside the sample space. We want to know what's the probability of the random variable taking any of those points. So what's the probability that x is 1? The probability is 1 by 6. Because we know that it is a fair dice, we know that the probability of any one of those faces coming on top would be 1 by 6. This would be true for x is equal to 2, for x is equal to 3, and likewise for all 6 possibilities. For each of them, the probability is 1 by 6 because it is a fair dice. If I say that it's a fair coin that I'm tossing, each sample point will have a probability of what? 1 by 2. So the probability of x either being heads or x being tails in the case of a fair coin toss would be half. That is true. Now, how did we calculate these probabilities? The calculation of these probabilities would require us to develop some sense of how probabilities actually get calculated. Now, in that sense, we need to understand what are the different ways in which the concept of probability is defined. And to do that, we are going to take, we'll first look at the three ways in which it is done. So there are three popular ways of finding out probability. And these are basically all definitions for probability. So there is a classical probability. There is an empirical probability. And then there is subjective probability. Now, each of these three kinds of probabilities, now these are three different ways in which you can calculate the probability of an event. The event could be anything. Let's say I roll a, let's say I toss a, I've rolled a dice. What's the probability of an event? What is the event? The event is getting a prime face on top. Can you find that out quickly? What's the probability of the event that you get a prime face on top? Put it in the comments. 3 by 6, 1 by 2, that's absolutely correct. 1 is not right. Why 3 by 6? How are we able to say 3 by 6? We are able to say 3 by 6 because we know that when you roll a dice, you get either of these 6 faces. Now, how many of these faces are actually prime? 2 is a prime number, 3 is a prime number, and 5 is a prime number. So 2, 3, and 5 are the 3 prime numbers that are available in the sample space. So if I get any one of these 3 faces on top, I can say that my top face is a prime face, which means that there are 3 possibilities. Out of the total number of outcomes, there are 6 possible outcomes, out of which 3 of the outcomes are favorable. So the probability is 3 by 6 or 1 by 2. Now, this we calculate intuitively, but there's a fundamental logic behind how we are able to perform this calculation. And that logic can be understood when we talk about these 3 kinds of definitions for probability. Now, what is classical probability to begin with? This classical probability is the one that helped us find out the probability of getting a heads in a fair coin toss. When we said that getting a heads is half, what did we base this on? We based this on logic and formal reasoning. When you calculate probabilities based on ideas like logic or formal reasoning, now here, that is what we've done. We've said that there are 2 possibilities. Each of those possibilities should be equally likely because you're doing a fair coin toss. If you're doing a fair coin toss, you should have equal probabilities for all possibilities, and therefore there are two possibilities, and that is how we make it 1 by 2. The same logic gets applied when we decide that if a fair dice is rolled, what's the probability of getting a 3? It's 1 by 6. How did we get to this? It was because of classical probability. It was because of formal reasoning and logic. We said that because this is a fair dice and this is a fair coin, the probability of getting a heads is 1 by 2, and the probability of getting a 3 or a 4 or a 5 is 1 by 6, because each outcome should have equal probability by virtue of the fact that it is fair, and therefore we are able to calculate probabilities directly. Now that is the idea of classical probability. Now what's the idea of empirical probability? Well, empirical probability is defined by a formula. That formula is number of favorable outcomes divided by total number of possible outcomes. Now, when you calculated the probability of getting a prime face on top, this is the idea that you use. You use the idea of empirical probability. You saw what were the possible number of total outcomes. There were 6 possibilities. There were 6 faces. Any of those faces could have come on top. So there are 6 possibilities, out of the 6 cases, there were 3 cases. If 3 of those faces came on top, it would be a favorable outcome for that event, and hence in calculating the probability of that event, we were able to use or leverage the idea of empirical probability, which says you simply calculate the number of favorable outcomes out of the total number of possible outcomes for an event. As long as you're able to calculate these two things, you'll be able to get a sense of empirical probability. This is the idea that we used in calculating the probability of getting a prime face. Now the problem with empirical probability is this depends on doing the experiment. Now let's say if I used the idea of empirical probability to find out the probability of getting a heads in a coin toss, how would I do that? I would probably toss the coin multiple times. Toss the coin multiple times. Let's say I toss the coin n number of times, and out of those n times, m occasions you get a heads, and definitely n minus m occasions you get a tails. Based on this, if I were to use empirical probability to calculate this, it would be an unfair calculation. You would say that the probability of getting a heads based on this is the number of favorable outcomes, which is m, divided by the total number of outcomes, which is n, because there are n number of times that you calculate this. So the idea of empirical probability wouldn't be very useful, because in this case, out of 20 times, there's a good chance that 12 times you get heads, or you get it only 7 times, or you get 9 times. So in cases like this, empirical probability is not the best way to go forward. You'd probably use the idea of formal logic and reasoning to calculate classical probability in that sense. But in a lot of other cases, you'd see that empirical probability is what we hope to calculate. So if you've heard about applications for data science, one of the popular applications for data science is email spam filtering. It's one of the popular applications that people read about in the early stage when they're trying to explore data science. What it does is tries to find out probabilities of certain events. Now this probability is found out completely on the basis of empirical rules. You try and figure out that out of every time that you find the word congrats in an email, how many of those times, if you found the word congrats in 100 emails, out of which 85 were spam, then you know that the probability of encountering a mail which is spam, given that it has the word congrats in it, is very high. And therefore you're able to use the idea of probability there, specifically empirical probability, to find out favorable cases out of all possible cases to get a sense of probability. So empirical probability is probably something that gets used in a lot of those kinds of cases. But when there's fair reasoning, when there's a good use case for using simple logic and reasoning to get a probability, we use the classical probability sense. The third kind of probability is actually subjective probability. Now to understand this, you probably think about stock markets. Now, I don't know how many of you are actually people who are earning or who spend money in the stock market. I don't know a lot of, given that a lot of you are probably very early into your careers, I don't expect a lot of you to probably be in the stock market. But for anybody who's got even a slight understanding of how stock markets work, you would know that everything rests on the idea of an uptick or a downtick. So at least for people who are not bullish, who do not stay in the market for long periods of time, who like to make money quickly, what is it that they're looking for? Let's say you've got a stock price versus time model. So based on where you are, so at every time duration there is either a uptick or you continue to go up, then there's a downtick, then you go up, then you go up. So at any given instant in time, let's say you purchase at this stage, you'd be happy to sell it here. Again, when it goes down, you're not so happy to sell it now. You'd again wait for it to go up. So you want to increase your earnings. In that sense, what you're interested in is trying to predict whether a stock is going to go for a downturn or an upturn. Will it go up the price or will it go down? Based on that, you're going to take a decision whether to buy or to sell. Now, that is a prediction that you're hoping to make. Now, one of the basic rules of economics, financial economics to be specific, is that there's really no way to predict whether a stock is going to go up or go down based on history. At least make an immediate prediction for a small period of time is very hard to do, which means that it's extremely dicey to decide whether a particular stock is going to go up or go down. Having said that, we say that it follows something called a random walk model. Now, without digressing too much, a random walk model tries to emulate the behavior of a drunk person. So if you think about a drunk person who is completely out of whack, who's drunk way out of his limit, and if you try and see him walk, what's something that is peculiar about the walk of a drunken person? Something that is peculiar is you do not know where the next step is going to land. Whether he goes left, goes right, goes forward, goes backward. Typically, if you imagine a drunken person, that's how he looks like. You don't know where he's going to put his next foot forward. That is how stocks typically behave in most markets. They follow a random walk model, which means that wherever you are at any given point, predicting whether you're going to go up or go down is an extremely difficult prediction to make. But still, having said that, for people who actually invest, and there's several people who invest in the market and who make a lot of money out of it, what they're interested in doing is, let's say you've got a S&P index, S&P 500, let's say this is an index, and you've invested in this index and you're trying to make money out of it. You want to understand whether this index will go up or go down, say in the next 1 month. Based on that, you're going to take a buy or sell decision. Now, as many number of analysts you meet, you ask analyst A, what's the probability of an uptick? Let's say he says 60%. You ask analyst, what's the probability of an uptick? He says 70%. Another person C might tell you 40%. You keep talking to more and more analysts and you realize that everybody has his own prediction on what's the probability of an uptick, which means that how is it that the same event has different probabilities when they get calculated, which means that the way that these calculations are happening are subjective in the sense that it includes personal individual judgment. So every analyst has his own interpretation of how the stock is going to move, his own understanding of how the market typically behaves, and one investor might be good, or one of these analysts would be good in some markets, the other would be good in some other markets, where you've got a better understanding of how things move there. So this prediction that people make, that analysts are making on probability, these probability calculations, other than the standard information that is available in public record, they're using some personal judgment and personal knowledge of that space to affect that probability number, based on which they're going to recommend to their investors that you should probably buy or sell for this particular stock in this given time frame. Now, this kind of probability calculation is called subjective probability, wherein every person can have a different number in mind for a particular probability, because it's not just based on public information that is available on record, but it's also based on personal sentiments, personal judgment of how the market behaves and everything. So these kinds of probabilities would be termed as subjective probability. Is the idea between the three kinds of probabilities clear? Are you comfortable with these terms now? A yes or no would suffice. Good. Brilliant. Just like an IPL match prediction. Yeah, absolutely. That'd be an example for subjective probability. Every different agency would have a different probability of what the outcome is going to be. which means that there's some subjective knowledge, some personal judgment that they're putting into these probabilities, and therefore these probabilities are getting calculated differently for different people. So these are three popular ways in which people discuss the idea of probabilities. Now what we're going to talk about is we're going to talk about events. Now we've talked about simple events like getting a prime face on top, or getting, let's say, picking out a red ace out of a deck of cards. So any of those events, and we've talked about events. Now there are different kinds of events that you would study, and there are two popular categories which we're going to discuss. There's one category which is called mutually exclusive events. And there's another category of events which is called independent events. We try and understand the difference between these two events. So what do we understand by mutually exclusive events? So mutually exclusive events are events. So if there are two events A and B, where the sample space of A and sample space of B have absolutely nothing in common, which means that the sample space of A and the intersection of that with the sample space of B gives you a null set. So when you've got two events in question where there are no points in the sample space which are common across those two events, those kinds of events would be called mutually exclusive events. To give you an example, let's say you toss a coin and you roll a dice. What are the possibilities for tossing a coin? Heads or tails? What are the possibilities for rolling a dice? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. Now, if you try and compare these two, let's say call this SA, call this sample space for B. If you take an intersection of these two sets, what do you get? You get a null. There are no points in the two sample spaces that are common. So if you've got two events that you're discussing, or it could be many more than two events as well. Let's say you've got several events that you're discussing, and there's nothing in terms of, common across those events in terms of sample points. If that is a scenario that you're working with, that is what we call mutually exclusive events. Now that's about mutually exclusive. Independent events are defined as sequential events where the outcome of one event has absolutely no bearing on the second event. So let's say Virat Kohli winning a toss. Virat Kohli winning a toss. There's a test match series. And there are three tests. Let's say there are three events in that case. The toss in test 1, the toss in test 2, the toss in test 3. So when you go to the first test, the toss, what are the probabilities for toss? Either you, sorry, not heads or tails. You either win or you lose the toss. When you go to the second test, let's say you won in the first test. Will that have any impact on what happens in the second test? The toss that happens in the second test? Not at all. When you go to the second test, again, you've got similar probability. You have a 50% chance of winning. You've got a 50% chance of losing. You go to the third test, or you go to any tests, any number of tests after that. No matter what happens in one of the previous events, that is not going to have any bearing on what happens in the future events. So when you've got these kinds of events where the outcome of one event absolutely has no bearing on the outcome of other events, you would say that those are independent events. So the idea of independent events, revolves around the concept of sequential events. So as long as events are sequential, if the outcome of one event has absolutely no bearing on the outcome of the other, that is an indication that the events in question are independent events. Now I'm going to create a few events for you. I want you to tell me exactly if you can find combinations for mutually exclusive events there. So the experiment is going to be a dice roll. In that dice roll, I'm going to define three events. there is event 1, which is getting a prime face on top. There is event 2, which is getting an odd face on top. There is event 3, which is getting a even face on top. Now I've got 3 events. I want you to tell me combinations of events which are mutually exclusive. If at all there are any combinations of events that are mutually exclusive, I want you to name those combinations. Take a minute, think about it. Think about how we identify mutually exclusive events. The best short way of doing that is to write out the sample spaces of each of the events in question. If there are any combination of events where there is nothing in common across the sample spaces, that is an indication that you've got a mutually exclusive event at hand. So the best way to solve this would be to write out the sample spaces for each of the events. Okay, so E2 and E3, 3 of you have said that E2 and E3 are actually mutually exclusive events. Great, that's absolutely right. So if you write out the sample spaces, that makes the job much simpler. So the sample space for E1 happens to be 2, 3, 5. These are the cases or the favorable outcomes which would lead to the top face being prime. If you think about the odd face on top, that is going to leave us with 1, 3, and 5. If you talk about the even phase, that will leave out 2, 4, and 6. If I try and make combinations, if I try and make these mutually exclusive, are they exclusive? No, they aren't. 3 and 5 are common. If we try and make these two mutually exclusive, are they exclusive? No, they aren't. They've got 2 in common, which leaves us with this and this. If you look at these two events, you see that there are no sample points that are in common, which means that E2 intersection E3 is going to be a null set. Any other combination did not work. E1 intersection E3 gave me 2 and E1 intersection E2 gave me 3 and 5. So this is the only combination that allows us to say that these are mutually exclusive events. Everybody is absolutely clear about this? Yes or no will be good. Great. Super. All right. So that's about mutually exclusive events and independent events. So that's how we differentiate between these kinds of events. A good way to do that, like we said, mutually exclusive events, a good way to identify the presence is to look at the sample spaces individually and then compare these sample spaces across different kinds of events. Now, this was one classification for events that we discussed. There's another classification that we'd like to discuss for events. So events could be categorized based on this as well. So there are 2 kinds of events that we'll again speak of. You can either be working with simple events, or you could be working with joint events. Now, what are the examples for this? Now, what's the idea behind something being a simple event or something being a joint event? Now, the thing about a simple event is a simple event focuses on just one characteristic, whereas a joint event focuses on more than one. That's the simple difference. When I say characteristic, to give you an example, if I try to find out what's the probability of getting a red card in a deck, can you calculate that? What's the probability of getting a red card in a deck of cards? 0.5, absolutely. So there are about 52 cards, out of which 26 are red. So the probability of getting a red card would be half. Now, this is a use case for a simple event because there's only one characteristic that we are interested in, which is trying to identify cards that are red. So there's only one characteristic about cards that interests us, which is finding a red card. Now, let's say I give you another probability to find out what's the probability of getting a red ace in a deck. Can you guys find this out? Brilliant. So some of you have made a mistake saying 4 by 52. So it's 2 by 52 because out of the 52, there are 4 aces. Out of those 4 aces, there are 2 aces that are black and there are 2 aces that are red, which means that there are 2 favorable outcomes out of 52, which means the probability becomes 1 by 26. Now this is a use case for a joint event because there are 2 characteristics of the card that you are interested in. You are interested in the card being red, and you're also interested in the card being an ace. Now, because there are 2 characteristics at play here, we say that this is a joint event. Similarly, a continuation of that idea is that when you calculate probabilities for a simple event, we call it marginal probability. When we calculate probability for joint events, we call it joint probability. Just terminology that allows us to distinguish between simple events and joint events. Now, simple events are relatively easier to calculate probabilities for. As compared to that, joint events make life a little more difficult. And for that, we've got 2 very popular rules in probability, and we are going to discuss those rules now. The first rule that we'll talk about is called the addition rule. This is one of the most general rules in probability, which is the addition rule. Now, what's this rule? What is the definition of this rule? This is a rule that helps us calculate joint probability. What kind of joint probability? It helps us calculate probabilities like this, A or B. So there are 2 events. You want to find out the probability of either A happening or B happening. In set terms, this is represented as PA union B. The other kind of joint probability that we might be interested in is P, A and B. So both event A and event B happen at the same time. That would be termed as probability of A intersection B. In set terms, it would be written as PA intersection B. Now, this is something that leverages the power of the addition rule. Addition rule will help us find this out. This is something that will power the leverage the power of the multiplication rule. So there are 2 rules that we study. The first one is the addition rule. The second one is a multiplication rule. Now, what does the addition rule say? The addition rule gives us a formula for calculating joint probabilities like this, which is probability of A or B. Gives us a formula for calculating probability A or B, and that formula is given by this. It says probability of A plus probability of B minus the probability of A intersection B. So this is the formula for the addition rule. This is famously known as the addition rule. Now, understanding this in set terms is much easier. So you write PA or B as PA union B, and we can look at it in the form of a Venn diagram to understand exactly how this works out. Let's say these are 2 sets. This is set A. This is set B. We are trying to find out the probability of A union B. We said the formula goes like this. It's PA. So keep marking the area that I'm tagging. So the red line is sort of indicating the area that is measured by PA. Then we write probability of B. This will be marked by blue shaded areas. So the blue shaded area looks like this. And then we write minus PA intersection B. What's this A intersection B part? Can you point that out? The intersection, right? The A intersection B part in this set terms would be defined as what region? This region This is what you know as A intersection B. Now, when you add PA and PB, you see that PA intersection B, the part that is represented that by that part of the graph, gets counted both in PA and it gets counted in PB. Can you see that? As a result of that, when you do PA plus PB, the PA intersection B part gets counted twice. Therefore, we got to remove it once, and that gives us a sense of what's the probability of either A happening or. So if you're anywhere in between these two circles, if you're anywhere within these circles, that is a favorable event. Everything that happens outside is not favorable. So when I say PA, that covers the entire circle A. When you say PB, that covers the entire circle B. Sorry, it covers the entire circle B. When you add both of these together, you see that the intersection part of the two circles will get added in both of these cases. And as a result of that, you've got to subtract it at least once. Now let's try and actually apply this to the problem that we are solving. Let's try and solve out what's the probability of getting a red card or an ace. Solve this for me. Share the answers on the chat, then we'll attempt it. I want to find out the probability of drawing a card which is either red or it is an ace. How do you calculate this probability? Be very careful with what I'm asking. Either a red or an ace. So this is a union. So getting a red card would work as A. Getting an ace would work as B. So you're trying to find out what's the probability of A union B. We've just learned a formula that can help us calculate this joint probability effectively. Try using that to calculate. Shakti has gotten the answer right. That's 28 by 52. That's the correct response. See if you're getting this. I'll give you a minute to do it. You'll have to basically write out these probabilities, which is probability of A plus probability of B minus the probability of A and B happening together. I think one of these happening together we've already calculated. A and B you've got to calculate and you will be able to solve this. 28 by 52. So a lot of you are getting it. That's the correct response. If you're not able to get it, we'll just solve it in a while. So I'm giving you another minute to solve, try and keep solving it. One by 26 is not right. All right, let's solve this. So what's the probability of A? Probability of A is the probability of getting a red card in the deck. What's the probability of getting a red card? We've already calculated it. It's 26 by 52. Plus it says what's the probability of B? The probability of B would be the probability of getting a ace in the deck. What's the probability of getting an ace in the deck? That's 4 by 52. Perfect. Then we are left with the subtraction term. The subtraction says what's the probability of getting a red card and an ace. So getting a red ace. We calculated that there are 4 aces in the deck, out of which there are a couple of black aces and a couple of red aces. So you subtract 2 by 52 to that. What you get as a result of this is 28 by 52. So we figured out this rule is clear, the addition rule, how we use the addition rule to solve this. Good. Brilliant. Now there's something interesting about this addition rule that happens in the case of mutually exclusive events. So if you're doing it for any other kind of event, for events that are not mutually exclusive, this is a formula that goes very well. But let's say you're working with mutually exclusive events, this formula changes slightly in that case. It's not a change. You can figure it out when you get that case. But when you look at mutually exclusive events, the formula says PA union B is defined as probability of A plus probability of B minus the probability of A intersection B. Now, if you're dealing with mutually exclusive events, one of the terms here becomes 0, and that term is this one. This term here becomes 0. Now, because these are mutually exclusive events, the intersection will always be a null set. So when you're working with mutually exclusive events, this formula gets reduced to the simple PA plus PP. As long as they are not mutually exclusive, the complete formula will work. When you're working with mutually exclusive events, the formula takes an interesting turn and the PA intersection B term goes out. So that's the idea of mutually exclusive events in the presence of the addition rule. The next rule that we'll talk about is the multiplication rule. Now, the multiplication rule is an interesting rule that introduces us to another concept in probability, which is called conditional probability. Before we write out the multiplication rule, we'll talk about what conditional probabilities are. Now, conditional probability is something that is mathematically written like this: probability of A given B. This is read as probability of A given B. What's the meaning of this? The meaning of this is that the event B has already happened. Keeping that knowledge in mind that B has already occurred, what's the probability that A happens as well? So what's the probability of event A happening given that event B has already happened? That is what conditional probability means. Now, to give you an example, let's consider two events. Let's say event A represents getting an even face and event B represents getting a prime face. Can you tell me what's the probability of A given B? At least what's the interpretation of this? The interpretation goes like this, that you know that event B has already occurred, which means that the face on top is definitely prime. We know for a fact that whatever face is on top right now as a result of that dice roll is definitely prime. Now I want to figure out what's the probability that it is also even. So how do I do that? I write out the sample space for event B. The sample space for event B is 2, 3, and 5, which means that these are now my total possible outcomes. Can I say that? These are my total possible outcomes. When I say that event B has happened, I'm sure that the possible face on top is either 2, 3, or 5. Now, what's the probability that is even as well? Now, only one possibility out of this is even, which means that the probability of A given B in this case is going to be 1 by 3. We are able to calculate this by knowing how to calculate empirical probability, and we were able to get a sense of each of these individual probabilities very easily, and that is why this calculation seemed easy at this stage. There might be scenarios when you it will be difficult for you to gauge individual probabilities for A and B, write out the sample spaces and then use empirical probability, in which cases we leverage the power of the multiplication rule. Now, what the multiplication rule says is that if you've got to figure out probability values like these, you need to do something very simple. You need to follow the multiplication rule. Now, what does the multiplication rule say? The multiplication rule says that PA given B is calculated as probability of A intersection B divided by PB. This became popularly known as the multiplication rule. Now let's use this formula to solve the previous problem. The problem was A was getting an even face, B was getting a prime face. Now how do we use this formula to apply the multiplication rule and solve it? We are trying to find out the probability of A given B, and that is probability of A intersection B divided by probability of B. Now what's the probability of A intersection B? Can you find that out? The probability of intersecting A intersection B, meaning you get an even prime face, a face that is both even and prime. A intersection B would mean that. What's the probability of that? Okay, the majority says 1 by 6. 1 by 6 is the right response actually. How so? We know that even face would require it to be 2, 4, or 6. Prime face would require it to be 2, 3, or 5. Now there is only one possibility where a number is both even and it is prime, and therefore that's the one possibility, one outcome that would make the face on top a even prime, and that makes the numerator 1 by 6. What about the denominator? What's the probability of getting a prime face? The probability of getting a prime face is 3 by 6, which makes my probability at 1 by 3. So we're able to calculate this using the multiplication rule as well. We just calculated it using the general empirical probability formula, but we are now able to also calculate it using the multiplication rule. Now, this conditional probability is something that has huge applications in data science. Now, it helps you solve all kinds of problems, right from, so like I said, I gave you the example of spam. Now, spam models, what they do is they're trying to find out the probability of a mail being spam given a certain set of words are present in it. Those words could be congrats, thank you, a collection of those words. Now, the way these spam models are created is by creating or finding out these conditional probabilities. You find out what's the probability of a word being spam, of a mail being spam, given that it has a certain set of words in it. Any one of those words or more than one of those words. If those words are present, what's the probability of calling it a spam? How do you find that out? We use the idea of probability of spam intersection words divided by probability of words. So you'd find out what's the probability of getting the words that are disputable in a typical mail. So you, let's say, take the data for 5,000 mails, find out the probability of getting a certain set of words in those emails. And out of those words, how many of those emails were spam? If you're able to label that, you'd be able to predict this probability and get a model that can do spam filtering for you. So the whole idea of spam filtering works on the principle of conditional probability. Even a lot of work in marketing happens based on conditional probabilities. So let's say you're a company and you're interested in understanding your sales, and your sales depends on the marketing spend that you're doing across 3 channels. Let's say you're doing some marketing in the TV media, you're doing some marketing in the digital media, and you're doing some marketing in the, let's say, what do you say, billboards. So people are not just interested in understanding that, let's say I spend $100 here, $200 here, $300 here. Let's say I spend this much amount of money across these 3 channels. The one useful thing about building these models is that you'll be able to predict what the expected level of sales is. Based on a model that you create in data science, you'll be able to predict sales based on the knowledge of the input values. If you know that, okay, this is the spend that you did, you'll build a model that will help you predict the value for sales. Other than that, what it will also do is it will tell you what's the probability of improving sales given that you spend some money in TV versus what's the probability of improving sales given that you spend some money in digital, and likewise for each channel. What these conditional, let's say this is a calculation that you're doing, that if you spend $1 extra in TV, what's the change in sales that you expect? If you spend $1 extra in digital, what's the change in sales that you expect? And you do this for all your channels. The one value, let's say it gives you different values. So V1, V2, or S1, S2 sales levels you're getting. Now the sales level which is maximum. So for an incremental unit of incremental dollar that is spent across a particular channel, the sales, the channel that gives you maximum increment in sales is the channel in which you want to spend most of your money in. So those kinds of insights can be generated by using these path to prescription models, which help you understand what's the relevance of or what is the likelihood of a lead converting if he sees an ad on a TV channel, if he sees an ad on a digital channel. People have taken this one step further. Actually, they want to understand what's the probability of conversion given a person has watched a TV ad after he got a call from a salesperson, or what's the probability of conversion when he saw a TV ad after he got an SMS from our team. So people are even interested in finding out these paths. They're no longer just interested in finding out which channels are more effective. And that's a very major marketing analytics project that keeps on happening. It's called market mix modeling. So market mix modeling. You try and understand different channels across which you're spending money, and you try and pinpoint how much each of those channels are contributing to your final sales. So when you build models like these are called market mix models. As a result of these models, you hope to explore the relative effectiveness of different channels when it comes to penetration in terms of sales. Whichever channels seem to be more effective, those are the channels where you spend more money in. Now, that research has been taken one step forward, where they now are not just interested in what's the final channel that is leading to a conversion. They're interested in how a person has got there. If you saw an ad on digital, did you see the ad for the first time here, or did you first receive an SMS? Even before that, you'd received a call. So you're finding out these kinds of conditional probabilities. So when you do that, you start understanding that, okay, it's not just the effectiveness of a single channel that is important, but it is important to follow a particular path for a conversion to be more likely. If you want a person to convert easily, you probably decide that, okay, if I first send an SMS and I then give him a call and then he then sees an ad, that is when a person is most likely to convert. So you find out these things to get a sense of how conversions can happen. And that is again where conditional probabilities hold a lot of importance. So the idea of conditional probability would help you, identify problems like these and sort of find answers to these kinds of questions. Is this idea clear? The idea of conditional probability. Super. All right. I think we're not going to extend this a lot now. We'll solve one question before we close, just to get you to get a sense of whether you understood the idea of conditional probability or not. So I'll give you an idea, a simple question. The question goes like this. The question says that there's several cars in a used car parking lot. There's a used car parking lot, and there's several cars in that parking lot, out of which 70% of those cars have an AC. 40% of those cars have a CD player. So keep in mind what I'm saying. So 70% of the cars have an AC. 40% of the cars have a CD player. There are about 20% cars that have both. We are interested in finding out the probability that if a car has an AC, what is the probability that it has a CD player too? I want you to find out this probability. Take a couple of minutes, solve this, share your answers in the comment. Two by seven. Two of you say 2 by 7. Are the people getting something different? Are you all getting 2 by 7? Great. 3 people. 2 by 13. Okay. Two by 7 again. So it seems like 2 by 7 is winning. Let's see. Brilliant. So a lot of people are saying 2 by 7. Let's see what that answer is. 2 by 7 is actually the right answer. So that's good work. So what we are trying to find out mathematically here is finding out the probability of having a CD player given that you have an AC. Now we've already studied how to compute probabilities like this. That probability is given by probability of CD intersection AC divided by the probability of having an AC. We already know this probability. This is 0.2. We know this probability as well. That's 0.7. So that gives me 2 by 7.